The second knock was softer, but it cut through the wind like a bone-handled knife. Caleb Hartman dropped the strip of leather he'd been threading through a busted bridle and froze, his hands still greasy with bare fat. He hadn't heard a knock on his door in weeks, maybe months. And sure as hell not in the middle of a howling blizzard. He stood slowly, listening past the roar of the wind raking the eaves, past the hiss of snow against the windows. Nothing. Then, tap, tap. The fire snapped behind him as he crossed to the door, boots thudding on the rough plank floor. He grabbed the rifle leaning by the frame, thumb brushing the hammer. There were only two reasons someone came knocking in weather like this: either they were dying or planning to kill. He cracked the door an inch. The wind screamed inside like it had been waiting. Snow blasted his face, blinding, but through the blur, a figure leaned hard against the doorframe, barely upright. Covered in frost and rags, a woman. Before he could react, her knees buckled. She pitched forward into his arms with the weight of a sack of feathers and the cold of death. "Jesus," he muttered, dragging her in and kicking the door shut behind them. She was ice. Her hair, once pinned up proper, now hung in frozen ropes around her face. Her dress, some eastern wool thing meant for train rides and polite company, was soaked through and stiff as hide. He laid her in front of the fire and stripped off her gloves. Thin city things, her fingers were white, blue, and stiff. "Stay with me," he said under his breath, rubbing warmth into her hands. "Don't you quit on me now." The woman stirred, barely. He moved fast, throwing wood on the fire until it roared. Then he grabbed every damn blanket he owned and bundled her like a newborn calf. Her lips moved. "Please." Her voice was cracked and dry, barely audible over the storm, but it wasn't begging. It was remembering. He pulled off his coat and laid it over her, then hesitated. That dress was soaked through. She'd freeze again before morning. "Mom," he said carefully, crouching beside her. "I don't want to scare you, but those wet clothes gotta come off or you won't make it through the night." Her eyelids fluttered, green eyes, unfocused, panic flickered there. "I'll turn my back," he said quickly, grabbing a fresh flannel from the hook by his bed. "Wrap up in this. I won't look." He turned, listened, heard the fabric shift, heard her teeth chattering. Minutes passed. Then, a voice, shaky but clear, "I'm decent." He turned back. She was swaddled in his old shirt and two quilts, hair wet and sticking to her temples. The color was starting to return to her face. Though her lips were still pale, he poured coffee into a tin cup and knelt, offering it to her. Her hands shook too much to hold it, so he helped her sip. "You got a name?" he asked, voice soft but firm. "Rose," she whispered. "Rose McAllister." Her last name snagged on something in his memory. He didn't know why. She tried to sit up and winced. "Where am I?" "Gallatin Valley," he said. "About 15 miles north of Ash Hollow. You're lucky you found my cabin. Nothing else out here but trees and regrets." Her eyes brimmed. "He left me." Caleb said nothing, just waited. She shook her head, like she was still trying to believe it. "Ezekiel Boone. I was supposed to marry him. I came all this way, and he looked at me once, just once, and said, 'You're not what I ordered.' Then he rode off, left me at the fork in the road with this bag and $10. She gestured weakly toward a small satchel by the door. "I tried to walk back to town," she said, voice cracking. "Then it started snowing. I lost the road. Then I saw your light." Caleb's jaw clenched. He'd known Ezekiel Boone's type. Money, land, and a mean streak wide as the Missouri. But abandoning a woman in a storm, that was murder dressed as manners. "Rest now," he said, pulling another quilt over her. "We'll talk in the morning." She nodded, eyes already closing. He sat in his rocker by the fire, rifle across his knees, and watched her sleep. Outside, the wind screamed like something wounded. Inside, the only sound was the crackle of wood and her unsteady breathing. He didn't sleep. Not because he couldn't, because something didn't fit. Rose McAllister. That name, it rang familiar, but not from the church ledger or the rail station, from Boone. He'd heard it once, at the saloon. Boone had been bragging about a bride, said she was, Eastern stock paper polite, bred for parlors not plains. He'd laughed, said he'd send her back if she came brittle. But he hadn't sent her back, he'd sent her into the blizzard. A new sound broke through Caleb's thoughts, distant, sharp. He rose, crossed the room and cracked the door again. Far off, beyond the tree line, under the swirl of snow, 3 points of orange light torches. Too steady for stars, too early for sunrise. They were moving toward him. "If she dies before morning," Caleb whispered, hand tightening on the rifle, I'll never forgive myself. She didn't wake until morning, and even then, it was barely. Caleb had drifted off in the rocking chair sometime near dawn, rifle across his lap, boots still on. When he opened his eyes, the fire had burned down to embers, and the wind outside had quieted to a low mournful hush, like the storm was catching its breath. He looked over and saw her eyes open. Just barely her body didn't move, but her gaze met his across the room. The whites of her eyes were dull, and she blinked slow, like it cost her something. "You stayed up," she murmured, her voice cracked and raw. "Didn't much feel like sleeping," he said. She looked around the cabin, piecing together where she was. Her gaze lingered on the pile of blankets around her, the fire, the tin cup on the floor beside her. Caleb stood and poured fresh coffee into the same cup, now warm again from the stove. He knelt and held it out to her, steadying her hand when she reached for it. She tried to sit up. "Easy," he said. "You're still half froze." "I'm all right," she said, though her face said otherwise. "No, you ain't." Her lips twitched. Not quite a smile. "You're honest." He shrugged, then helped her ease into a seated position, propping her up with a folded quilt behind her back. She took a sip of coffee. Hand still trembling, she held the cup with both hands to keep from spilling it. "Do you remember how you got here?" he asked. She stared into the cup. "Yes." He waited. She didn't speak again until the cup was almost empty. "I got off the train yesterday morning, Ash Hollow," she said. "First time I've ever seen snow like that. I thought it looked beautiful." She laughed once, dry and bitter. "Shows what I knew." Caleb pulled over a stool and sat across from her. There was supposed to be someone waiting, a man named Ezekiel Boone. I recognized him from the daguerreotype he sent, tall, heavy-set, big black coat. He was already on his horse when I stepped off, didn't even say my name. She looked down, her voice dropped. He just looked at me, top to bottom. Didn't say anything for a long time, then he said, "Phew." She paused, eyes flicking up to Caleb like she wasn't sure she should go on. "You don't have to." He started. He said, "You ain't what I ordered." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Caleb swallowed. "Did he say why?" "Too thin, too pale," said I had city hands. She held up one as if to inspect it herself. He asked if I even knew how to gut a rabbit. I said no. That I was willing to learn? I thought it was a joke. Her hand lowered. It wasn't. She shook her head slowly. He said he'd changed his mind, that I should take the fork in the road and head back toward town before the weather turned. Then he rode off. "Left you there?" She nodded. Caleb's chest burned, not with shock, not with surprise, but with a cold, quiet rage that felt carved from stone. "You try to head back." "Yes, but the snow was getting worse." I walked for, I don't know how long. The road vanished, my boots filled with ice. "Then I saw your light." She paused. "I thought I was imagining it." "You weren't?" She looked at him again. "I don't even know your name." "Caleb Hartman." She nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Hartman, for everything. You don't need to thank me for not letting you freeze to death." "I do," she said. "Most wouldn't have opened the door." He didn't answer that. She stared at the fire for a long moment, then her eyes drifted toward the satchel by the door. "There's a letter in there," she said. "He left it with me," said it explained everything. Caleb stood and fetched the bag. It was soaked and partially frozen, but the envelope inside was still intact. He handed it to her. Her fingers shook as she opened it. She didn't read it. Just passed it to him with a bitter twist of her mouth. Caleb scanned it. "This letter serves to dissolve any understanding between myself, Ezekiel Boone, and Miss Rose McAllister. Citing misrepresentation and unsuitability for the conditions of ranch life, $10 is enclosed to assist in return passage." There was no signature, just a stamped name. He crushed the letter in one hand and fed it to the fire. They watched it burn. "You can stay here as long as you need," Caleb said finally. She blinked at him. "I'll get you to town once the road's clear. Might take a few days. Until then you've got a roof, heat, food. I have no money for lodging." "I didn't ask for any." She opened her mouth, then closed it. "Why?" Caleb shrugged. "Figure it's just neighborly." She smiled faintly. "You think we're neighbors now? I don't see anyone else knocking." She looked down at the cup in her hands. "What were you expecting?" he asked quietly. When you stepped off that train." She took a long breath. "Not love. I'm not a fool. I was hoping for decency, stability, a roof, maybe someone who'd talk to me at supper, someone who'd look me in the eye." She glanced at him. That doesn't sound like much, does it? It does to me. Silence fell, comfortable almost. Then Caleb stood. You take the bed tonight. I'll sleep by the fire. I couldn't. You can and you will. She nodded once. He helped her stand, slow and careful. She leaned on his arm. Lighter than she looked, as he guided her to the cot, she paused halfway, eyes meeting his. I don't know what this is, she said. But I know what it isn't. What's that? It isn't charity. And I'm not broken. He nodded. Didn't figure you were. After she lay down, Caleb returned to the rocker and picked up his rifle again. The firelight danced across the worn iron barrel, casting flickers on the wall. Rose's breathing evened out, slow and steady, but he couldn't sleep. He kept hearing that voice, Boone's, echoing through the back of his skull. You ain't what I ordered. The fire popped. Outside, the storm had lessened, but the cold remained. Caleb stood, crossed to the window, and looked out far off, just at the edge of the trees. He saw them again, the same 3 flickers, torches, closer now, moving fast. He didn't know if Boone was coming back, but he did know one thing. He left me to die, and I don't even know why. The wind didn't stop. It only changed shape. By morning the blizzard had eased from a full-blown scream to a constant, bitter murmur. The world outside the cabin was buried in white, so thick and deep it seemed like the whole valley had disappeared. Caleb stepped out onto the porch with a rifle slung across his back, the snow crunching under his boots, crusted and heavy. His breath turned to smoke in the sharp air. He scanned the tree line. No sign of torches. No tracks. Just snow piled high on pine boughs and the soft crackle of ice shifting under weight somewhere out of sight. Still, something inside him stayed taut. Back inside, Rose was awake and sitting at the table in his oversized flannel shirt, her damp dress hanging near the stove on a makeshift clothesline. She looked better. Color in her cheeks, strength in her posture, but she still held her coffee with both hands, as if the heat was the only thing tethering her to the present. You got livestock? She asked, her voice still hoarse but steadier than before. He nodded. A few cattle in the barn, one stubborn mule. Chickens when the foxes don't get em. You check on them this morning? Not yet. Snow's deep. I'll have to dig my way to the barn. I could help? He gave her a look. I said could. She added quickly. Not should. You're not lifting a finger until you've got more meat on your bones than that flannel. She smiled at that, real, small, but there. He ladled hot porridge into a tin bowl and slid it across the table to her. Thank you, she said again, quieter this time. He nodded and grabbed his coat. Don't go far, she said as he reached the door. He paused, one hand on the latch. You worried about the cold or something else? Her gaze held his. Both. He nodded once and stepped out into the snow. The path to the barn was buried under 2 feet of hard, packed white. Caleb shoveled with a makeshift scoop and brute determination, carving a narrow tunnel to the small structure. The cold was biting, but movement kept it from sinking into his bones. As he worked, his thoughts spun. He couldn't stop thinking about her sitting at his table, Rose McAllister. Abandoned like trash. Boone hadn't even tried to cover his tracks. Just dropped her like a misordered package. But it wasn't just Boone's cruelty that gnawed at him. It was how close she'd come to dying, and how close he had come to not opening that door. What would have happened if he'd waited 1 minute longer? She would have frozen, curled up like a broken bird on his doorstep. And he never would have known. He forced the thought down and kept shoveling. Inside the barn, the animals were restless but alive. He fed them, checked hooves, and threw fresh straw where needed. He muttered to his mule, old Daisy, who only gave him a snort and a swat of her tail in return. By the time he made it back to the cabin, his beard was iced over and his shoulders ached. But when he stepped inside and saw Rose by the stove, hair now dry and pulled into a simple braid, face flushed from the heat, a spoon in one hand and a skillet in the other, he felt something ease in his chest. You cook? He asked, brushing snow off his sleeves. Only badly, she said, flipping what looked like fried dough in a pan. But I figured if I'm going to be here another day or two, I ought to pull my weight. Not a requirement. I know. Still. She set a plate in front of him. The dough was a little burnt but smelled good, warm, familiar. He sat and ate. She sat across from him and watched like a woman waiting for a verdict. Better than hardtack, he said around a mouthful. High praise. He finished the plate. She poured more coffee. You said Boone gave you $10? She nodded. You still got it? In my bag. You should keep it close, he said. He may come looking. I thought the torches were a dream, she said softly. They weren't. She went quiet. Her eyes drifted to the fire. What if he finds me? Caleb looked at her a long moment before answering. He won't get near you, not while you're under my roof. She blinked hard, swallowed, then nodded once. The silence between them changed after that, not heavy, not awkward, just fuller, more real. That evening, Caleb showed her how to patch a tear in his work shirt. Her fingers were cold at first, but once she warmed them up near the fire, she sewed faster than he expected. My mother taught me this, she said no woman should rely on a store when she's got 2 hands and eyes good enough to thread a needle. She sounds smart. She was. He didn't ask what happened to her, he didn't need to. I used to dream of the West, she said, still stitching. I thought it would be wide and full of light, like I could breathe better here. Caleb sipped his coffee. It is wide, he said, not always kind. Neither was home. She tied off the thread and held up the shirt. Fine work. She set it aside and leaned back. The fire lit her face in soft gold. Why are you out here? She asked. Out where? In the middle of nowhere. Alone. He shifted in his chair. Same reason most folks end up out here, I expect. And what's that? He paused, then said, running from something, or trying to build something no one else can take. She nodded slowly. Which one are you? He didn't answer right away. I tried the town thing, he said finally. Didn't stick, never quite fit. People can be cruel. They can. Another silence settled, but it wasn't uncomfortable. She looked at him again, really looked. You've been kind to me, Mr. Hartman. Caleb? He said. She nodded. Caleb. He felt that name in her mouth like a brand pressed to warm skin. She stood, walked to the window, and pulled back the curtain slightly. Still snowing. Yeah. She turned back toward him, hands folded. If this storm never ends, she said, maybe I won't have to say goodbye. He didn't know what to say to that. His heart jumped, but his mouth stayed shut. He just watched her, standing there, firelight on her cheek, snow in her hair like she was part of the winter itself. Outside, the wind picked up again, and deep in the forest, unseen by either of them, a figure dismounted from a horse and knelt by a set of boot tracks, half buried in snow. If this storm never ends, maybe I won't have to say goodbye. The next morning, the valley looked like it had been dipped in powdered glass. The storm had calmed, but the sky remained heavy and colorless, like a breath held too long. Caleb stepped outside before sunrise, boots crunching in the frozen snow, rifle slung over his back just in case. The torches hadn't returned. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been close. Too close. He did a full circle around the cabin, boots sinking deep, no fresh prints. But the drifts could have covered anything that came through overnight. Snow was an expert at hiding things, tracks, danger, even decisions. By the time he got back inside, Rose had stoked the fire and was stirring something in the pot on the stove. Beans and salt pork, judging by the smell. She wore his flannel shirt again, sleeves rolled up, and had tied a piece of twine around her waist to keep it close. Her braid was loose down her back. You always patrol the perimeter before breakfast? She asked, not turning. Only when the world feels off, he said. That often. Often enough. She glanced over her shoulder, smiled faintly, then returned to stirring. Coffee's hot? He poured a tin mug and sat at the table, watching her move like she'd done it before. Like this wasn't her third day in a stranger's cabin. She slid the pot off the flame, ladled food into 2 bowls, and sat across from him. They ate in quiet. Until a distant crunch of hooves broke through the stillness. Rose stiffened. Caleb stood instantly, rifle in hand, eyes cutting to the window. There, just cresting the ridge, was a single rider, small, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a wool cloak the color of river mud. Then she waved. That's Maeve Doyle, Caleb said, lowering the rifle slightly. Who? Neighbor. Widow. Knows more about this valley than most men put together. He stepped outside as Maeve pulled up, her mule snorting clouds of steam. You planning to shoot me or invite me in? She asked, dismounting with surprising ease for a woman of her age. Doors open, he said, helping her down. She gave him a look, noticed. Inside, Rose had already cleared the table, brushing breadcrumbs into her hand. She turned when they entered. Maeve's sharp eyes landed on her and narrowed slightly, not unkind, just measuring. This her? Maeve asked. Rose McCullister, Caleb said, from Boston. Maeve stepped forward and extended a gloved hand. Maeve Doyle, I live 2 ridges over. And before you ask, yes, I came through this storm just to see what kind of trouble Caleb's gotten himself into. Rose shook her hand, unsure whether to smile. Maeve pulled off her gloves and coat, revealing a thick wool dress and 2 silver braid pins in her salt and pepper hair. She hung everything neatly by the door. Well, Maeve said, settling into a chair like she'd built it herself. Let's hear it. Rose looked to Caleb. He gave her a small nod. She told the story again. Train Boone, the fork in the road. But this time her voice was clearer, firmer, less shame. Maeve listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When Rose finished, Maeve let out a long breath. Ezekiel Boone, she said. That bastard's name leaves a taste like rust in my mouth. You know him? Rose asked. Oh, honey, everyone in Ash Hollow knows him. He's got more land than the church has sins, and half the town in his pocket. Caleb crossed his arms. You ever hear him talk about ordering a bride? Not in public. But I've seen the man looking at women like they're breeding stock, and he don't like being told no. Maeve turned to Rose. You're lucky to be alive. That storm wasn't mercy. That was murder dressed in wind. Rose nodded once, slow. I know. Maeve glanced toward the window. He won't let this be the end of it. I can handle Boone, Caleb said. Maeve gave him a look sharp enough to shave with. You can handle a man, maybe 2, but not the system he's built, not the reach he's got. So what do you suggest? He asked. Maeve leaned back. We prepare, quietly. If she wants to stay hidden, we make it hard for him to find her. If he shows up, we make damn sure he doesn't leave with anything he didn't walk in with. I don't want to cause trouble, Rose said, almost a whisper. Maeve turned to her, voice softening. Child, you didn't cause it. You survived it. There's a difference. A long silence followed, just the fire crackling and the sound of snow dripping from the eaves. I don't have any family left, Rose said quietly. No job, no plan. I came west with a lie in my hands and frost in my boots. I don't know what I am without it. Maeve nodded slowly. You're still breathing. That's what you are. And in this valley that counts for something. She stood and pulled a small flask from her coat, setting it on the table. For your nerves, she said with a wink, and for nights when the wind sounds like someone knocking. Rose didn't take it, but she smiled. Caleb walked Maeve out a while later. They stood on the porch.
Watching the trees.
You're serious about this? Maeve asked. He didn't answer. I saw the way you look at her, like something came back to life. He looked away. She's not just a woman in trouble, Caleb. She's a line in the sand. You protect her, you draw attention. Boone's not the kind to let things go. I don't care. You should. She mounted her mule. If Boone comes, Maeve said, pulling her hood over her head, it won't be for conversation. Then she rode off. The sound of her leaving swallowed quickly by snow. Back inside, Rose stood by the stove, arms wrapped around herself. What did she say? She asked. Caleb hung his coat and looked at her, eyes unreadable. She said we ought to be ready. Rose nodded. I don't want you getting hurt for me. It's not for you, he said. She looked up, startled. It's for what's right. He finished. She stared at him for a long beat, then turned back to the stove. That night, after supper, Caleb sat in the rocker while Rose mended a pair of his socks, the lamplight casting warm yellow across the floorboards. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. But Caleb noticed something. She was humming, a tune he didn't recognize, but soft and steady, like a woman remembering she had a voice. Outside, the sky darkened early. Clouds rolled back in, bruised and slow. The fire crackled louder than it needed to. Caleb checked the rifle again before setting it beside his bed. He didn't know what the next storm would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. If Boone comes, it won't be for conversation. Caleb found her outside just after first light, kneeling beside the woodshed with a bundle of letters in her lap. Snowflakes clung to her braid and her hands were bare, raw from the cold. You trying to freeze again? He asked from the porch, voice low. Rose looked up but didn't smile. She held up the letters like they were some kind of offering. I didn't want to read them inside. Caleb stepped down, pulling on his gloves as he walked. The air had turned sharp again, the kind of cold that bit through seams and cracked your lips without asking. He knelt beside her, careful not to crowd her. They're from him? She said. Boone. Her voice had no tremble to it, but there was a tightness behind her eyes, like a rope pulled just a little too far. I kept them, she added. Don't know why. Caleb nodded once, said nothing. She handed him the top letter. The paper was smudged and worn at the edges, creased from being opened too many times, but the ink held. My dear Miss McAllister, your last letter filled me with great anticipation. I've taken steps to prepare the ranch for your arrival. The spare bedroom will be yours to decorate as you see fit. I trust you have a mind for hearty meals and practical attire. Out here, we don't waste time with frills. Your presence will bring warmth to this hard land. Yours in earnest expectation, Ezekiel Boone. Caleb read it twice. His jaw tensed. He made it sound like a promise. Rose said, "A life. I sold my mother's locket to buy that blue wool dress." She looked down at her lap, fingers twisting in the fabric of her skirt. I practiced cooking stew with nothing but bones and root vegetables. I learned to darn socks, to patch shirts, everything I thought a ranch wife needed. Caleb handed the letter back. She didn't take it. I thought if I worked hard enough I could become what he wanted. What any man would want. Rose. She cut him off with a glance, but it wasn't anger. It was something quieter, older. "I'm not telling you for pity," she said. "I'm telling you because I need to say it out loud." He nodded. That he understood. She picked up another letter, opened it with the care of someone handling something half sacred and half poison. "Miss McAllister, it pleases me to hear that you are making preparations. I believe compatibility is forged more than found. With discipline and a shared vision, there is no hardship we cannot overcome. I trust your constitution is up to the challenge. E.B." Rose let out a small breath that sounded too close to a laugh. He spoke like a man writing business contracts, not wedding vows. Caleb reached out slowly, rested his hand over hers, her fingers stilled beneath his. She didn't pull away. "I didn't come west for love," she said. "I came because I had no other place to go. No one waiting for me, just a train ticket and the idea of not being someone else's burden." Caleb didn't say anything, just let the moment sit. "I thought if I became useful enough, agreeable enough, someone would let me stay. You don't have to earn your place here," he said. Her throat worked. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." She finally looked at him then. Really looked, and whatever she saw, it softened something in her shoulders. They sat in silence for a long stretch, snow piling in the corners of her shawl. Then she reached into the bundle and pulled out a final envelope. It was thicker, heavier, still sealed. "He gave me this the day he left me at the fork," she said. "Said it would explain everything. I couldn't bring myself to open it. Still don't know if I can." Caleb held out his hand. "May I?" She hesitated, then nodded. He broke the seal, pulled out the letter and read it aloud. "This letter serves to formally dissolve any implied understanding between myself, Ezekiel Boone, and Miss Rose McAllister. Upon review, Miss McAllister is deemed unsuitable for ranch life due to her physical constitution and temperament. She is advised to return east, where she may find circumstances better aligned with her sensibilities. $10 is enclosed for this purpose. This matter is concluded." No signature. Just a name stamped in block letters. Caleb folded the letter with slow, deliberate care and fed it into the wood stove beside them. Rose watched it burn without blinking. "He wrote love like a contract," she whispered, "and broke it like a bottle." The flame caught the edge of the page, curling it black. Ash floated upward like moths. "Do you still want to go back?" Caleb asked. "To Boston?" She shook her head. "There's nothing for me there, just creditors and cold rooms." "Then what do you want?" She hesitated. That answer didn't come easy. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I know what I don't want. I don't want to be looked at like a mistake, or a disappointment, or merchandise." "You won't get that here." He said it like a vow, not loud, not dramatic, just steady. She looked down at her hands again, then up at him. "I believe you." A knock at the door made them both start. Caleb rose instantly, hand on his rifle, eyes narrowing. "Expecting anyone?" she asked. "No." He opened the door to find a small girl wrapped in a red scarf and wool mittens nearly too big for her head. She blinked up at him, cheeks bright from the cold. "Mama sent me," she said to bring these. She held up a basket. Inside were a jar of preserves, half a loaf of fresh bread, and a note pinned to the cloth. He took it with a nod. "Tell your mama thanks." The girl nodded and turned to go, her boots squeaking in the snow. Caleb shut the door and handed the note to Rose. She read aloud. "Maeve said you might need a reminder you're not alone. Stay warm. Ellen Talbot." Rose's voice caught on the last word. She looked up at Caleb, eyes glassy. "Why are they being kind to me?" "Because you deserve it." She held that answer like it was breakable. They ate the bread with butter and jam that night, sitting side by side on the bench near the fire. She told him about her father's shipping business in Boston, and how it crumbled after his death, about creditors who smiled while they stripped the wallpaper from the parlor, about the landlady who suggested the mail order ad. Caleb told her about the first winter he spent in the cabin alone, when he almost froze trying to dig a path to his well, about how quiet could start to sound like voices if you let it, and for the first time, the silences between their stories didn't feel empty. Later, she pulled her knees to her chest on the cot and watched the fire while he checked the door and loaded the rifle again. "You think he'll come?" she asked.
"Yes."
She nodded. "Then I guess I need to decide who I am when he does." He turned toward her, voice low. "You're not what he said you were, Rose. I know." She lay down, pulling the quilt to her chin. "I just want to remember that when he tries to make me forget." He watched her a long moment before dimming the lamp. He didn't sleep much that night. In the woods, somewhere far but not far enough, a man dismounted quietly in the dark. He crouched low, brushing snow from a half-melted track, a woman's boot print. He rose, smiling. The fire inside the cabin burned steady, but something colder was coming. The sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. It wasn't much, just a thin wash of gold along the ridge, glinting off the snow and painting the trees with a light too soft to be trusted. But it was something, the kind of thing that made a man stand still a little longer on the porch. Caleb did just that, arms folded, breath curling up around his face as he watched the light slide down the valley like a cautious animal. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. "You always this quiet in the morning?" Rose asked, her voice still rough from sleep. "Only when I got something to lose," he said without turning. He felt her hesitate in the doorway, then step out beside him. She'd wrapped herself in the heavy wool shawl Maeve had left behind last week. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, but her eyes were wide and clear. "Is that what this is?" she asked. "Something to lose?" He didn't answer, not directly. Instead, he said, "Snow's settling. Might be able to get to town by end of the week." She nodded. "That's good." He glanced at her. She wasn't smiling. "You still want to go?" "I didn't say that." "But you're thinking it?" She looked away out toward the trees. "I don't know what I want. It's strange. To be safe. Feels like standing still when you've been running so long your legs don't know how to stop." He nodded slowly. He understood that better than most. They stood together in silence until her shoulders began to tremble from the cold. "Come on," he said, nudging her back toward the door. "I'll make breakfast. I've got just enough flour for something passable." Rose followed him in. Passable sounds perfect. The dough didn't rise much, and the biscuits came out lopsided, but they were warm and filled the cabin with the smell of butter and wood smoke. Rose ate hers slowly, savoring each bite like it was the last good thing she might taste afterward. She insisted on cleaning up. "You fed me. Let me do something that looks useful." "You've been plenty useful," he said, gathering the dishes. She snatched the tin plates from his hands and gave him a look that made him back off with a rare grin. "Fine," he said. "You win." She turned to the wash basin, sleeves rolled up. Caleb watched her hands. Delicate, still a little raw from the cold days ago, but steady now, confident. "Your hands don't look soft anymore," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "That's supposed to be a compliment." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Guess so." "Then thank you," she said with mock formality. "I'm deeply honored." He chuckled, and for a moment, it felt like something inside the cabin cracked open, not wide, just enough to let the light in. Later, he set about mending the strap on a saddlebag that had split from age and wear. She sat across from him, a shirt of his in her lap, needle flashing in the firelight. The quiet was companionable now, easy. "You always mend your own gear?" she asked, nodding at the saddlebag. "Unless I want it to fall apart on the trail?" "Well, your stitching's crooked." He looked up. "You offering to fix it?" "Maybe." He handed it over without a word. She examined the tear, frowning in concentration. Caleb found himself watching the little crease between her brows, the way she bit her lip when she was focused. "You always been out here alone?" she asked, not looking up. "Pretty much. Never thought of marrying." He shrugged. "Tried once. Courted a girl from Ash Hollow. She came to see the place, took one look at the cabin, and said she'd rather die an old maid than live in a shack." Rose didn't laugh. Instead, she set the saddlebag down and met his eyes. "This isn't a shack," She said, serious. It's strong, clean. You've made it into something solid. He blinked, caught off guard by the certainty in her voice. The woman was a fool. She added, that made something shift in him, something deep. Why'd you come here, Rose? Not to Montana. Here, this cabin, this door. She hesitated, then answered without looking at him. Because I saw a light. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I was cold and lost and nearly dead, and there was a light in the dark. I didn't care if it was a cabin or a saloon or a church. I just knew I had to get to it before I fell. Caleb swallowed hard. You made it. She nodded slowly. I did. They fell quiet again. He reached for the saddlebag, but his hand brushed hers. She froze. So did he. Their fingers stayed there, touching, not moving, and then, too quickly, she pulled back. I should finish this shirt, she said, voice uneven, right? He said, clearing his throat, yeah. But neither of them reached for their work. The silence grew thicker. Finally, Rose stood. I'll start supper, she said. You hungry? Not yet. She nodded and turned away. He watched her move to the stove, watched the way her fingers trembled slightly as she lit the kindling. Outside, the wind had started again. Not the sharp howling of the blizzard, but something quieter. A whisper, like a warning. That night, the cabin was quieter than it had been in days. They ate, talked a little about nothing. Weather. How many eggs the chickens might lay if the sun kept up? But the current beneath the surface had changed. There was a tension neither of them named. After supper, Caleb stepped outside to bring in firewood. As he turned to go back in, he paused. Something caught his eye. Half buried in the snow, just past the tree line, was a mark. Boot print, fresh, not his, not hers. He walked to it, crouched, and touched the edge of the indentation. The snow was still soft. This print had been made no more than an hour ago. He scanned the trees. Nothing moved, but he felt it. Someone had been watching. He didn't call for Rose. He didn't want to scare her, not yet. Instead, he went back inside and added another log to the fire. Rose looked up from the table. Everything all right? He hesitated, then nodded. But when he lay down that night, the rifle stayed beside him, and he listened to the wind for footsteps that never came. I should have let go sooner, but I didn't want to. By the fourth morning since the blizzard passed, the snow had crusted over and begun to recede in patches along the southern slope of the ridge. The wind was quieter now. Tired. Maybe from the fight, tracks lasted longer on the surface, so did questions. Caleb stood at the edge of the path he'd shoveled toward the barn, his boots crunching softly. He stared at the spot near the trees where he'd found that boot print 2 nights ago. It was gone now, blurred by melt and wind, but he remembered it too clearly to pretend it hadn't been there. Someone had come close, watched, maybe listened, and then left. He didn't tell Rose. Not yet. There was nothing actionable, nothing certain, just a tightening in his gut that hadn't let go since he saw it, back in the cabin. Rose was folding the last of the clean shirts she'd mended. Her movements were slow, deliberate. Her shoulders were stiffer than usual, her smile more practiced. He knew what that meant. The thaw wasn't just in the land. You packed already? He asked, brushing snow from his coat. She looked up. Not yet? But you've thought about it. Her fingers tightened slightly around the fabric in her hands. The road to town will be clear soon? Yeah. They stood in silence, the space between them longer than the room itself. I could help you make arrangements, he offered. Once we get to Ash Hollow. Her face turned toward the window, toward the open white world beyond the pane. I won't be anyone's problem, she said. Not again. You're not a problem? I'm not a wife either. Caleb looked at her a long moment, then walked to the stove and poured himself some coffee. He didn't sit. You could stay. She didn't answer. He tried again. I mean that? I know you do. The cup in his hand warmed his palm, but it didn't stop the chill running down his back. There was something about the way she said it, like she appreciated the offer but had already decided against it. I'm not trying to keep you here, he said. Yes, you are, she replied softly, but not for the wrong reasons. He nodded once, slowly. She trailed off, looking at the shirt in her hands again. I don't know who I am outside of what someone else needs. You're Rose, he said, voice quiet but firm. That's enough. Her eyes found his. It's not though. Not for the town. Not for the whispers. A woman staying in a man's cabin after a storm. People don't let that go easy. Let them talk. She smiled, sad. You've lived alone too long, Caleb. You've forgotten how loud a whisper can be." He walked over to the table, set the cup down gently, then leaned against the edge. "I can take you to town tomorrow," he said finally. "The road's passable if we ride early." "Thank you." Neither one looked at the other. That night's supper was quiet. They ate slow, like dragging out the minutes might keep the next day from coming. Caleb told a story about a cow that once kicked a tin bucket halfway to the next county. Rose laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. Afterward, she folded blankets and checked her bag. He stoked the fire, fixed the latch on the door, checked the oil in the lanterns. Busy hands for both of them. When she lay down in the bed, she pulled the quilt to her chin and whispered, "I never meant to stay this long." Caleb, sitting in the rocker, stared into the flames. "I never meant to want you to." The silence after that was full and aching. He didn't sleep. In the early gray before dawn, Caleb saddled the mule and one of his sturdier horses. The snow was frozen enough to ride without sinking too deep. The wind had calmed. He loaded Rose's bag and strapped it tight inside. She wrapped the shawl around her shoulders and tied her braid with a leather cord. She looked at the hearth once, like memorizing it. Caleb held the door open. She stepped outside. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the sky was starting to turn, a thin line of orange above the trees. She mounted the mule with practiced ease. Caleb climbed into the saddle beside her. They didn't speak for the first mile. The silence between them was thick with the weight of all the words they didn't know how to say. Then Rose broke it. "Thank you for not asking me to stay again." He nodded, jaw tight. "Didn't mean I didn't want to. I know." They crested a ridge, and the valley opened below them. Ash Hollow lay in the distance. Roofs just peeking through the thinning white, smoke rising from chimneys. Rose inhaled slowly. "That's the first time it's looked like a place I could belong." Caleb watched her face. "I guess that's a start," she said. They kept riding, but as they neared the bend that led toward town, something shifted in Caleb's chest. A knot tightening. He slowed his horse. She noticed. "What is it?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned in the saddle. Looking back the way they came, snow sparkled on the trail, untouched but for their tracks. Then, faint, but there, the sharp echo of hooves on frozen earth behind them. Not close, but not far either. He stared toward the tree line, scanning the shadows, and then he saw it, just a flicker. Movement in the trees. A rider? Watching. "Keep moving?" he said, voice flat. "What?" "Go." Rose turned her head, eyes narrowing. "Is it?" "Don't look. Just ride." She swallowed and nudged the mule forward. Caleb stayed close behind, one hand drifting down to the revolver at his side. They rode faster now, hooves crunching ice, wind cutting their faces. The town lay just a few miles ahead. But that wasn't the danger. The danger was what came behind. If I let her go now, she might never come back. The town of Ash Hollow emerged from the trees like a waking animal. Quiet, watchful, not quite safe. Smoke drifted from chimneys and thin gray trails. Wooden signs swung in the breeze, some covered in frost, others showing the wear of long winters and harder years. Caleb and Rose rode in slow, not speaking. The sun had barely risen, but a few shopkeepers were already shoveling snow off their stoops. Most of them paused when they saw the pair approaching, eyes narrowing beneath fur-lined hats, curiosity sharpening into speculation. Rose kept her head down. Caleb didn't. He guided his horse toward the livery. The stable boy blinked at them, then nodded quickly and took the reins. "Town feels different?" Rose murmured as they dismounted. Caleb glanced around. "Because it is." He helped her down from the mule, his hand lingering a moment longer than it needed to. She didn't pull away. They crossed the street, boots crunching on packed snow, and headed toward the general store. Caleb wanted to check for mail, supplies. Rose needed to catch her breath. Maybe more than that. But they didn't make it halfway down the boardwalk before a voice stopped them cold. Well, if it ain't the stray bride and the mountain rat." Caleb turned slowly. Ezekiel Boone stood in front of the saloon, flanked by two men. One a lanky ranch hand with a nervous hand twitching near his hip, the other a broad-shouldered brute with eyes like dull iron. Behind them, the sheriff stood with his thumbs tucked into his belt, expression unreadable. Rose froze beside Caleb, her breath hitching once. Boone smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only calculation. "I hear you've been hiding something of mine, Hartman." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Don't see anything of yours here." Boone's eyes flicked to Rose. "The woman, my bride, you remember the arrangement." Rose stepped forward before Caleb could speak. Her voice was clear. "There is no arrangement. You ended it, in writing. Boone's smile faltered for a moment, then he laughed. Oh, that scrap of paper. That was a misunderstanding, heat of the moment. I've reconsidered. You left me in a snowstorm, she said. You were free to return. I gave you money. Generous, some would say. You gave me $10, she said. Like that covered the train, the humiliation, and the frostbite. The sheriff cleared his throat. Miss McCullister, do you have the letter in question? Caleb reached into his coat and pulled it out, unfolded but dry, creased from being read too many times. He handed it to the sheriff. The sheriff read it slowly, then looked up at Boone. Says here you dissolved any understanding, paid her passage and all. Boone's face darkened. I was upset. She misrepresented herself. Caleb took a step forward. No, she didn't. You just didn't like what you saw once it wasn't on paper. Watch your mouth, Hartman. Caleb didn't flinch. You come near her again, I'll do more than talk. Boone stepped forward, nostrils flaring. That a threat? No, Caleb said, voice calm. It's a promise. The sheriff held up a hand, stepping between them. Enough. This town doesn't need blood on the snow. He turned to Rose. Miss McCullister, what do you want to do? She didn't hesitate. I want nothing to do with Mr. Boone. I want him to leave me alone. You owe me the cost of your travel. Boone snapped. $300. You left me to die, she said. That debt's been paid in full. Boone's face twisted, but before he could speak, the sheriff spoke again. From where I stand, this matter's settled. You're lucky she's not pressing charges. I suggest you let it go. Boone's eyes burned as he looked between the sheriff, Caleb, and Rose. Then he spat into the snow and turned back toward his horse. This ain't over, he growled. You think you can keep her, Hartman? You're just dirt and sweat. Sooner or later, she'll come crawling back to town, begging for work, and I'll be waiting. He mounted his horse hard enough to make it rear, then rode off, his men scrambling to follow. The sheriff looked at Caleb. You all right? I am now. The sheriff nodded once, then walked off without another word. Rose stood still, shaking slightly. Caleb stepped beside her, his hand hovering near her elbow but not quite touching. I'm sorry, she said softly. I brought this to your door. No. He said. He did? She looked up at him, eyes fierce and wet. What he said about you, it's not true. I know. You're worth 10 of him, 100. Caleb smiled, small and quiet. You always this generous? No, she said. Only when I mean it. They walked back to the mule and horse, people watching them from behind curtains, under hats, through windows. Let them. Later they sat outside Maeve's house on the edge of town. The widow had opened her door with a shotgun in one hand and a raised eyebrow, but softened quickly when she saw Rose. You held your ground, Maeve said, handing Rose a mug of tea. I heard every word. I didn't mean to make a scene, Maeve snorted. Sometimes a scene's what a coward needs to see his reflection. Caleb leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed. Boone won't give up. No, Maeve said, but now he knows she's not alone. That changes the odds. They stayed until the sun dipped behind the trees, then Caleb and Rose returned to the cabin inside. The fire was warm, the air heavy with the smell of cedar and ash. Rose moved to the stove and stirred the pot. Shoulders a little looser now, Caleb pulled off his coat, hung it by the door, and watched her. She turned, caught him staring, and raised an eyebrow. What? You did good today. She shrugged. I was shaking the whole time. Didn't show. I meant it, you know, she said after a moment. What I said in town. I know. She stepped closer. I don't care what anyone says. You're not just some mountain man. You've done more for me in 2 weeks than most folks have in a lifetime. He searched her face, voice low. Is that why you came back? I came back because this place, because you feel more like home than anything I've ever known. The air between them shifted. He reached up, brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. She didn't move away. Outside, the wind began to pick up again. You should rest, he said softly. Storm's likely coming back tomorrow. She nodded. Then we'll ride it out like we always do. You sure? She looked him in the eye. I'm done running. They stood there a moment longer before the fire cracked loud enough to make them both turn. Caleb stepped away, grabbed another log, and fed the flame. You should eat, he said. We'll need our strength. She smiled faintly and picked up the ladle. As she served the stew, a figure stood at the edge of town behind the church, just out of sight, watching, planning. You should have let her die in the snow, Boone. Would have been cleaner than this. The snow returned like a secret whispered across the valley, soft, then steady, then relentless. By midday, the sky had gone pale and heavy, pressing low against the treetops, and the wind slipped through the cracks around the cabin like fingers testing for weakness. Inside, Caleb was splitting kindling by the fire, while Rose stitched a tear in the hem of her only wool skirt. The rhythm of the axe and the scrape of thread through fabric had settled into something almost peaceful. Until the knock came, 3 sharp raps, then silence. Caleb froze. Rose's needle halted mid-stitch. Nobody knocked in a storm like this, not unless it was trouble. He set the hatchet down carefully and stood, reaching for the rifle hanging above the hearth. Rose rose to her feet, quiet but tense. Caleb opened the door with one hand on the butt of his gun. Maeve stood there, soaked to the bone, snow clinging to her shawl, breath coming hard. "Get your coat," she said. "We've got a problem." They rode out fast, Caleb on his bay gelding, Maeve on her stubborn old mule, Rose bundled tight behind Caleb, arms around his waist. The snow came down harder with every mile, turning the path to slush and then to ice. Branches bowed overhead, and the trail narrowed, closing in like a throat. They reached the Talbot homestead just after dusk. The front door was wide open. Snow had drifted inside, piling against the rug. The table was overturned, one chair missing a leg. The lantern swayed from the beam, casting frantic shadows. No sign of Ellen or the girls. "Damn it," Caleb muttered, jumping down from the saddle. Rose followed close behind, pulling the scarf from her face. "What happened?" Maeve dismounted slower, her breath ragged. "Neighbor boy saw Boone's men here this afternoon. Said they rode off with a wagon headed west." "They took them?" Rose asked, voice cracking. "No one's seen them since?" Maeve said, and Ellen wouldn't leave her fire burning. Caleb was already scanning the room, eyes sharp. "Footprints?" Maeve nodded. "Faint, under the new snow, but I saw the wagon ruts myself, deep, heavy, headed straight for the old mine road." "That's Boone's land," Caleb growled. "North Trail forks that way. If we move now, we'll lose light." Maeve cut in. "And we're outnumbered. Then we even the odds." He turned to Rose. "Stay here. Keep the fire up. If they circle back, I'm not staying," she said. Her voice was quiet but firm, like ice under pressure. "Rose, this isn't your fight." "It became my fight when he threatened children," she snapped. "When he tried to use me as bait. I know him. I know how he thinks." Caleb looked at her, jaw set, then nodded once. "All right, then stay close." Maeve raised an eyebrow. "You're sure about this?" "She's right," Caleb said. "This isn't just about her anymore." They grabbed supplies from the barn, lanterns, rope, extra cartridges, and left a note on the hearth in case Ellen came back. Then they rode out into the dark. The mine road twisted through the woods like a scar, old and half frozen. It rose toward the foothills where Boone's family once ran silver out of the mountains before the seams dried up. The place had been abandoned since the collapse 10 years back. Except for the cabin, Boone still kept it up, just enough to house hunting parties and men who didn't want their business seen. The tracks were faint but there. Caleb spotted the grooves of a wagon wheel buried beneath fresh powder. "We're close," he said. Then he heard it, a child's cry, faint, echoing. Rose turned her head sharply. "That's Abigail." Caleb urged the horse forward. Maeve followed, hand on the butt of her pistol. They rounded the bend, and saw it. The cabin stood crooked on its foundation, one shutter swinging loose in the wind. The wagon was there, tied to a post, no horses. Smoke curled from the chimney. Inside, someone moved. Caleb dismounted and crouched behind a fallen log. "Maeve, take the back. I'll go front." "I'll go with her?" Rose said. "No," Caleb said. "It's 2. She cut him off." "You go loud, we'll go quiet." He hesitated, then handed her his knife. "Only if you have to." She nodded. He crept forward, rifle raised. Inside the cabin, laughter rose low, drunken. A man's voice slurred something about good coin and keeping warm. Caleb stepped onto the porch and kicked the door open. The 2 men inside froze. One was seated holding a bottle, the other stood over a crate, startled mid-motion. "Evening," Caleb said, voice like gravel. "Where's Ellen Talbot?" Neither answered. Maeve's pistol cracked once through the rear window. The man standing dropped like a sack. The seated man reached for his belt. Caleb shot him in the shoulder, sending him sprawling. Rose burst in through the back, face pale but steady, dragging a crying child with her. "Ellen's not here," she said. "Just the girls." "They locked her up somewhere else," said Boone. Gave the order himself. Caleb grabbed the injured man by the collar. "Where?" The man spat blood. "Old shack. half-mile north, hidden by the quarry ridge. Caleb turned to Maeve. "Can you get the girls out?" She nodded. "Go." He ran. Rose behind him, no argument this time. They reached the ridge fast, lungs burning, snow blinding. There it was, the shack, one room, padlocked. Caleb slammed the butt of his rifle into the lock until it snapped. Inside, Ellen lay bound and gagged on the floor, bruised but breathing. Rose fell to her knees. Cutting the ropes with Caleb's knife, Ellen coughed, then whispered, "He's coming back, Boone. He said he wanted leverage." "We're done playing by his rules," Caleb said. As he helped her up, a single shot cracked through the air. Far off, but close enough, then another, closer. "He's already here?" Rose whispered. Caleb raised his rifle. They weren't out yet, not by a damn long shot. He looked at Rose and said, "Whatever happens next, we don't run." The first shot hit the tree just inches from Caleb's head. Splinters flew. Ellen screamed. Caleb shoved her down, shielding her with his body as another bullet cracked through the air, ricocheting off the rocks behind them. "They're flanking," he said, voice low, controlled. Rose knelt beside him, eyes wide but steady. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. Boone's got patience, but not that much loyalty." Ellen coughed beside them, her face pale, a dark bruise spreading along her jaw. Caleb scanned the trees. Shadows moved near the eastern rise, the snow dampened sound, but he could hear the crunch of boots. Slow and deliberate. "They want us to panic," Rose whispered. "They want us cornered," Caleb corrected. "This shack's got one wall and half a roof, no good in a siege." He turned to Ellen. "Can you run?" She shook her head, ankles gone, stepped wrong when they dragged me in. Caleb cursed under his breath. "We can't stay here," Rose said. "We'll be picked off one by one." He nodded once. "There's a gully about 40 yards north. If we can make it there, we can drop low and double back toward the ridge." "We're not leaving, Ellen?" "I didn't say we would." Caleb turned, eyes locking with Rose's. "Can you draw fire?" She blinked. "You mean me? They're expecting me to run first? If you take the back trail with some noise, shouting, snapping brush, they'll shift toward you. Just long enough for me to move." Ellen. Rose hesitated. Her breath steamed in the cold. Then she nodded. "I'll do it." He pulled the revolver from his belt, handed it to her. "Only if you have to." She gave him a thin smile. "I remember." Then she slipped out the back, low and fast, boots crunching deliberately loud. "Moments later," she shouted. "Come and get me, cowards!" Gunfire lit up the snow like sparks on dry tinder. Caleb didn't wait. He threw Ellen's arm over his shoulder and dragged half, carried her toward the gully. Bullets hissed past them, but Rose had drawn enough heat to split the aim. They reached the edge of the ravine and dropped, sliding into the brush below. Caleb rolled, breathing hard, Ellen beside him. "You all right?" "I'm still breathing," she rasped. He peeked up, no movement, no sound. Then 2 shots, closer now, toward the east ridge. His gut twisted. "Rose, stay down," he told Ellen. Already crawling back up the incline, he moved through the trees like a shadow, rifle raised, each step measured. Then he saw her. Rose stood on a boulder, one arm bleeding, eyes blazing. Boone was 10 paces from her, gun leveled. "Don't!" Caleb shouted. Boone didn't flinch. "Put your rifle down, Hartman. Let her go." Boone smiled. "She's not yours to take. She came out here with my name on her papers. I burned those papers." Rose said, "They were never yours to begin with." Boone turned to her. "You really think he's different? He's a dog in a coat, same as the rest?" "Maybe," she said. "But he never locked me in a shack." Boone's jaw twitched. He raised the pistol. Caleb fired first. Boone dropped like a sack of flour, his body twisting awkwardly as it hit the snow. The pistol fell from his hand and slid across the ice. For a moment, no one moved. Then Caleb rushed to Rose. She was pale but standing. "Just grazed," she muttered. He pulled her into his arms, hands searching for blood, for worse. "I'm fine," she whispered. "It's over." But he shook his head. "Not yet." 2 more men emerged from the trees, rifles drawn. But when they saw Boone's body, they stopped. The taller one spat into the snow. "We're done," he said. "We didn't sign on for murder." He dropped his rifle and walked away, the other following without a word. Caleb stood there, breathing hard, snow falling soft again. Rose leaned against him. "What now?" she asked. He looked down at her, brushing hair from her eyes. "We bring her home then. We build something that lasts." She didn't answer right away. Then, "Even if the whole town's watching," he nodded. "Let him." The 3 of them walked back, slow, Caleb carrying Boone's pistol in his coat, By the time they reached the cabin, the fire was still alive. Maeve was waiting on the porch, shotgun in one hand. The girls curled asleep inside. She looked at them all, bloodied, bruised, but standing, and said, "Took you long enough." Caleb smiled. "We got delayed." Maeve opened the door without another word. Inside it was warm. Rose sat beside the fire. Ellen curled under blankets. Caleb knelt by the hearth, tending the flame. Nobody spoke for a long time. Then Rose looked at him across the room. "He tried to break me," she said quietly. "But he didn't know I was already rebuilding." And Caleb answered, "He never had the right tools anyway." The snow melted slower than usual that year, but it melted all the same. By early March, the drifts had shrunk to crusty ridgelines and pale ribbons along the base of trees. Streams gurgled with fresh runoff, and the town of Ash Hollow had begun to stir, like something waking from a long, strange dream. Rose watched it all from the cabin porch with her arms wrapped around a mug of weak coffee. Caleb sat beside her, sharpening a hatchet. The rhythmic scrape of metal on stone steady and slow. A comfortable silence stretched between them. She'd been healing, not just her shoulder, though that wound had closed to a thin pink line, but inside too. Some days she woke without dread. Some nights she slept without clutching the knife beneath her pillow. The quiet had become safe again, but there was still unfinished business. "I want to testify," she said. Caleb didn't look up, but the hatchet paused mid-stroke. "About Boone." Now he turned. "You sure?" She nodded. "The sheriff needs a full account, not just for me. For Ellen. For what those men did out at that cabin." He set the blade down gently on his lap. "You'll be talked about." "They already talk," she said. "I might as well give them the truth to chew on." He gave her a long, quiet look. Then he nodded. "All right, I'll ride with you." The courthouse in Ash Hollow was little more than a room above the general store, with a creaky floor and an old clock that chimed too slow. Sheriff Withers stood behind his desk with a notepad in hand and an oil lamp burning low. "You sure about this, Miss McAllister?" he asked once she stepped inside. "It's Rose," she said. "And yes." He gestured to the chair. Caleb stood behind her, silent but solid. She gave her full name, described her arrival, Boone's words, his threats, what he did, what she'd seen him do. When she got to the part about the Talbot cabin, her hands began to shake. Caleb reached forward, not touching her, but close enough she could feel the steadiness in his presence. Sheriff Withers didn't interrupt. He just listened, the way a good man should. When she finished, the room was very quiet. "I'll file this with the circuit judge," he said. "There's a hearing next month. Most of Boone's men cleared out, but if any return—" "I want this on record," Rose said, "so they know." The sheriff nodded, scribbled a few more lines, then reached out to shake her hand. "You've got more grit than most men I've known," he said. She blinked, caught off guard, then smiled, small but real. "I've had a good teacher." They walked out into the street as the sun broke through the clouds, lighting the snowmelt in gold. It ran down the gutters and into the thawing dirt like veins waking in the earth. Caleb touched her elbow. "You all right?" "I think so," she said. They passed the saloon. A few heads turned, but none. They saw Maeve waiting near the stables with a bundle under her arm. "You forget how to visit?" she asked with a grin. "I've been busy," Rose said. Maeve handed her the bundle. Inside was a folded dress, deep green, sturdy, hand-stitched. "You'll need something decent for town meetings," Maeve said. "People listen better when you look like you belong." "I didn't ask to belong," Rose said softly. "No," Maeve replied. "But you do now?" Back at the cabin, Caleb brought in more firewood while Rose ran her fingers across the new fabric. The stitches were tight, thoughtful, a labor of care. "I haven't had something made for me in years," she murmured. He looked up. "You've earned it." She turned to face him. "I'm not the same person who came to your door in the snow." "I know. And I don't know what that means yet." He walked closer. "It means you get to decide." That night, she stood by the fire while he cooked stew, the smell of onions and pepper drifting through the room. "I was thinking," she said. "That's dangerous," he teased. She smiled. "I want to work. Do something useful. For the town." He stirred the pot. "Like what?" "Maybe open a place, somewhere women can go. Get a hot meal, shelter, if they need it, a place with a door that stays open." He paused, ladle hovering mid-air. "That's a good idea," he said. "I've lived through things," she added. "That might mean something to someone." "It does to me." Their eyes met across the firelight. She looked away first, cheeks flushed. I don't want to just survive anymore, she whispered. I want to matter. Caleb set the ladle down and crossed the room. You already do. Outside, the wind had shifted again, warmer now, carrying the scent of pine and melting ice. She leaned against him, letting the silence hold them both. After dinner, they sat with the windows open for the first time in weeks. Spring was coming, slow but certain. Rose reached for his hand. I'm not running, she said. I know, he replied. She looked toward the trees, voice soft. But part of me's still waiting for something to go wrong. Caleb nodded. Then let it wait. We'll be here when it doesn't. And in that still moment, surrounded by wood smoke and thawing earth, she believed him. If survival was the start, this might finally be the living. The day the land fully thawed, they buried what was left of Boone. It wasn't much, just a wooden box nailed shut, no inscription, no mourners. Sheriff Withers and a gravedigger did the labor, and Maeve showed up out of decency, though she brought no flowers. Caleb stood a few yards off, arms crossed. Rose watched from even farther back, near the fence line, her hands stuffed in her coat pockets, knuckles white. No prayers were said, no words exchanged. The wind was the only sound. When the last shovel of dirt hit the lid, Withers wiped his brow and muttered, Let the ground have him, ain't no man left to miss. They didn't stay long, no one did. But Rose remained after the others had gone, staring at the unmarked mound until Caleb came to stand beside her. He doesn't get a headstone, she said. No, Caleb answered. She didn't cry, she didn't feel hate either. Not anymore, just wait. The kind that takes a long time to stop carrying. I thought if I saw him in the ground, it'd feel like something ended. She murmured. Maybe it did, Caleb said, or maybe it just made room for something else. They walked home in silence, boots muddy and heavy. 3 weeks passed. Rose's shoulder healed, Ellen's limp faded. Maeve began teaching the Talbot girls to read, and Caleb built a bench outside the cabin, because Rose liked to sit there at dusk with her sewing and her thoughts. The town's eyes began to soften. They didn't forget. Ash Hollow remembered everything, but memory in a place like that could be shaped with time, with action. So Rose acted. She helped Ellen clean out the barn and rebuild the chicken coop. She volunteered at the church kitchen, even when no one asked. She baked loaves of rye bread and handed them to widows who wouldn't meet her eye. Maeve noticed first. They're coming around, she said one morning over coffee. Rose raised an eyebrow. You think so? They don't spit when they say your name? That's a start. Caleb grunted from the doorway. I'll take not spitting over sermons any day. They all laughed, and then the letter came. Sheriff Withers handed it to Rose in town, brow furrowed. It's official, he said. Circuit judge reviewed your statement. He's clearing the matter. Rose unfolded the paper with shaking hands. It was formal, coldly worded. But in black ink, it confirmed what she already knew in her bones. Boone's death was ruled self-defense. Her name was cleared. No trial, no further charges. Just a final, heavy period. That night, she read the letter aloud by the fire, voice steady. Then she folded it, set it on the mantel, and said, It's over. But Caleb shook his head. It's only just starting. The next morning, Rose walked the full length of town with her shoulders back and her chin lifted. She wore the green dress Maeve made her, and a scarf the Talbot girls had dyed with crushed berries. She knocked on the door of the old barber's shop, vacant since December, and spoke to the mayor about renting the space. I'm opening a women's shelter, she said plainly, nothing fancy. Warm bells, a place to land. The mayor raised his eyebrows. And you'll run it? I already do, she replied. Only now I want it to have a roof. He stared at her a long time, then sighed. Town ain't got funds. I'm not asking for funds, just permission. He glanced toward the church window, then nodded once. You get it running. You'll have no trouble from me. By week's end, she had keys to the building and a list of supplies scrawled on butcher paper. Caleb volunteered to fix the windows. Maeve patched the chimney. Ellen sewed curtains. By mid-April, the front door bore a simple painted sign, the Hearth House, and on the first night it opened, a woman arrived, trembling, alone, thin as thread. Her name was Clara. She'd walked 3 towns over to get away from a man who drank too much and loved too little. Rose gave her stew, a blanket, a place to sleep. She didn't ask questions, just sat with her until morning. Late one evening, after Clara had dozed off by the fire and Maeve had gone home, Caleb stayed behind to check the door locks and count lantern oil. Rose sat at the kitchen table sipping tea. He leaned in the doorway, arms folded. You made this place real. She looked around, soft candlelight flickering off walls still smelling of fresh paint. Feels real. He walked over, pulled out a chair beside her. I've been thinking, he said. That sounds dangerous, he smiled. About building something more permanent. She tilted her head. You mean, I'd like to stay. Not just from the cabin, not just for the thaw. Her eyes searched his. You're asking? I'm telling, he said. But I'll ask too if it makes it easier. She reached for his hand, laced her fingers through his. You already live in every part of my day, she whispered. The rest is just paperwork. Caleb chuckled low. Romantic, she smirked. You want romantic? Try me after we put Clara to bed. They laughed quietly together. The kind of laugh that comes when there's nothing left to run from. Then Rose leaned her head against his shoulder. You think we'll ever really be free of him? She asked after a while. Boone. She nodded. Caleb said. But he won't own any part of what comes next. She closed her eyes. Good, she whispered, because what comes next is mine. And outside the world kept thawing, slow, stubborn, alive. The rain came down hard the night the fire started. It had been dry for weeks, the ground cracking under boots, the air brittle with pine dust. Then came the lightning. One strike, North Ridge. The kind that doesn't need company, just heat, bark, and bad timing. By the time the smoke reached Ash Hollow, the flames were already licking through the treetops. Caleb smelled it first. He was hauling water buckets to the new side shed when the wind shifted. He stopped mid-step, sniffed the air, then turned fast. Rose. She was inside the hearth house with Clara and two new girls who had come in just that week. One with a split lip, the other with bare feet. They were braiding twine for curtain rods, soft music playing from the corner crank box. He burst in, face pale. Fire, he said. North Ridge. Moving fast. Clara stood. The barn, worse, winds pushing it down toward town. Rose was already gathering cloaks, ushering the girls to their feet. Where's Maeve? Already heading to the creek line with the older kids, Ellen too. They're trying to make a fire break. Rose handed the girls boots and blankets. We'll go to the church basement. No, Caleb said. Too close. That roof's old. We go uphill. Bring what we can. Travel light. She nodded, heart pounding. You get the horses. I'll grab food. They split. No panic. Just urgency. Movement practice by people who'd already lived through loss. 10 minutes later, they had 5 on horseback and 2 on foot. Caleb led the way toward higher ground, away from the growing plume of smoke now painting the sky orange, gray. As they reached the crest above town, Rose looked back and saw the first tongues of fire cresting the far trees. One of the girls gasped. That's near the bakery. Rose's throat tightened. Below, Ash Hollow began to shift. Figures moved. Buckets passed. Dogs barked. Bells rang. The hearth house stood untouched, for now. But for how long? At the ridgeline they met a dozen others. Townsfolk who had made for the same high pasture Maeve once used for grazing. The earth here was sparse, rocky, too dry to burn fast. The Talbot girls were there, hugging blankets. Maeve was overseeing a line of people digging shallow fire breaks with shovels and spoons, anything they had. Caleb, she called. We've got half a mile of dry pine and 1 busted hose. You got anything better? He shook his head grimly. We'll have to fight it with dirt and hope it chokes. Rose looked toward town again. If the hearth catches? Maeve met her eyes. It's not gone yet. Can I go down? Rose asked. Just to grab the ledger, the girls' names. It matters. You've got 2 minutes. Caleb said, no more. She didn't argue. She ran. Inside the hearth house, it was strangely quiet. Smoke had thickened near the rafters, but the building itself still stood firm, windows closed, curtains wet from the buckets Caleb had thrown across them earlier. Rose darted to the kitchen, grabbed the ledger, stuffed it under her coat. Then she paused. Beside the fireplace was a small wooden box, the one Clara had brought with her weeks ago, filled with baby shoes and 1 faded letter. She grabbed it too. Outside, the sky pulsed red. She turned to leave. Just as the back window exploded inward, heat slammed into her. The fire had reached the alley. She coughed, dropped low, and scrambled for the door. A voice echoed behind her, faint, strained. Hello, is someone there? She froze. Then again, help. The cellar. Someone was in the damn cellar. Rose kicked the trapdoor open and found the barefoot girl, Dell, curled in the corner, covering her face. I couldn't keep up, she sobbed. I came back from my necklace. Come on, Rose said, voice hoarse. We're going now? She hauled Dell up and half dragged, half pulled her out the front just as a second window burst, glass raining down like hot hail. They ran, coughing, eyes burning, and as they crested the hill again, the hearth house finally caught. The roof cracked, timbers screaming, flames curling out of every window like fingers grasping upward. Rose collapsed to her knees. Dell clung to her. Caleb rushed to them, dropping beside her, checking for burns. She shoved the ledger into his arms. "I got it," she coughed. "Names? Histories. We didn't lose everything." He looked down at the smudged, water-stained book, then at her face. "You went back for people," he said. "Of course I did." He touched her cheek, thumb brushing suit. "You're not just rebuilding. You're protecting." The wind gusted, and they all turned to watch the hearth burn. A man nearby whispered, "There goes the safest place in town." Rose stood slowly. "No," she said. "The safest place in town is wherever we decide it is." She turned toward Maeve, who was already pulling together new tents, gathering salvaged supplies, and Rose walked toward her without pause. Because it wasn't over. Because tomorrow they'd start again. The grass came back in patches first, soft shoots poking through blackened soil like hope testing the ground. By late May, the ridge was green again, and the townsfolk of Ash Hollow had rebuilt what mattered most. Not all of it looked the same. The saloon lost its front door. The livery stable wore scorch marks like battle scars. The old bakery had to be torn down. But something had changed that went deeper than wood or stone. People had helped each other, and once they'd done that, it became harder to go back to looking away. They remembered that it mattered. The hearth house was gone, but in its place rose a new structure, simpler, lower, wide enough for 12 bunks, a communal kitchen, and a stove that stayed warm through the night. The sign above the new door was hand-painted, slightly crooked. It read "Still Hearth." Rose chose the name herself. "Because some fires don't die," she told Caleb one afternoon while they nailed the shutters into place. "They just move into the walls and wait to be needed again." He grinned. "Sounds like someone I know." She gave him a sideways glance. "You talking about me or yourself?" "Us," he said. "Neither of us burned out." They were married quietly at the end of spring, no big to-do. Just Maeve as witness, Ellen's girls scattering wildflowers, and the preacher muttering kind words beneath the cottonwoods. Rose wore no veil, just a blue ribbon in her hair and boots stained with ash and mud. "I thought I'd feel brand new," she told Caleb that night as they watched the sun dip behind the ridge. "Do you?" She shook her head. "I feel like myself." "That's better." He wrapped an arm around her, pulled her close. "It is," he said. Summer brought new faces. Women and girls who had heard stories, passed from ranch to rail depot to river town, tales of a place where no one asked why you left, only how they could help you stand. They came with swollen eyes and bruised ribs, with children in tow, with no names or too many, and Rose greeted each of them the same way. Warm meal, clean blanket, quiet space. She never promised healing, only safety. Everything after that, she'd say, is up to you. One night in July, Caleb found her sitting alone on the porch of Still Hearth, watching the sky. The stars were out, sharp and stubborn. He sat beside her, handed her a tin cup of cooled coffee. "You're not sleeping again?" he said gently. "I will," she replied. "Just needed to listen for a while." "To what?" She took a slow sip. "To the quiet. I used to think silence was something dangerous, meant someone was coming, meant something was missing. And now," she smiled faintly, "now it means we made it through another day." They sat like that for a while, the kind of long silence that didn't ask to be filled. Then Caleb said, "You think we ever stop carrying the worst of it?" "No," she said, "but we get better at choosing what else to carry with it." He nodded. "And what do you choose tonight?" he asked. She reached for his hand. "This," she said, "and whatever comes next." In time, the story of Rose McAllister became a kind of whisper in Ash Hollow. Not a legend. Those belonged to outlaws and gunmen. But something quieter, steadier. The story of a woman who'd been sent to a stranger like a package and turned that broken arrival into a whole new beginning. Who stood her ground when the world told her she wasn't worth keeping. Who built something warm from the coldest part of her life. People remembered. They taught their daughters. And in the stillest hours, when the wind moved gentle through the cottonwoods and the smoke from the stove curled into the sky, you could almost hear her voice in the air. "It's not where you come from that saves you. It's what you do when no one else will." And somehow, that was enough.